Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another webinar in the AOH's 2022 webinar series. I'm Andrew Alphanis, a proud member of the AOH, and I'll be chairing this very interesting session. Before I start, I would like to just do an acknowledgement to country. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Australian Institute of Occupational Hygienists acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples today. Okay, so our speaker today is Dr. Georgia Katib from the Asbestos Safety Eradication Agency, and she'll be talking to us about the updates on the research activities that they're undertaking. So Dr. Georgia Katib is an Assistant Director with the Commonwealth Government Asbestos Safety and Eradication Agency. She has over 7 years regulatory and policy research experience in the Australian public sector, focused on the critical appraisal and synthesis of diverse data and information for risk assessment in the chemicals management context or for informing policy decisions. This work has delivered recommendations covering work health safety, public health and the environment, and included extensive stakeholder engagement and management. Her research experience is underpinned by a PhD in medicine and a 15-year career as a medical research scientist, both nationally and internationally, in academia and the pharmaceutical industry. Georgia has worked in multidisciplinary teams and used analytical approaches to investigate complex issues, to deliver evidence-based information and new knowledge for informed planning and decision-making. Just wanted to also just let the audience know that for any questions, could we please leave them to the end of Dr. Georgia Katib's presentation and not necessarily put them into the chat because that distracts probably me and those that are listening. So we want it to obviously pay full attention to Dr. Georgia Katib. So on that note, I'll pass you on to Dr. Georgia Katib and enjoy. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. So today I'd like to give you an update on the research activities being undertaken by the agency, and in particular on those with a focus or a feel for occupational hygiene. Okay, so firstly, a little bit about the agency. The Asbestos and Safety Eradication Agency was formed in 2012 following a whole of government review. We are not a regulator. We were formed to oversee the implementation of the Asbestos National Strategic Plan. So this means coordinating national actions to improve asbestos awareness and the effective and safe management, removal and disposal of asbestos, as well as seeking that priorities and strategic actions across all jurisdictions are working towards a shared purpose. So Commonwealth, state and territory governments have all agreed to implement the Asbestos National Strategic Plan. And this has the overarching aspirational aim to prevent exposure to asbestos fibres to eliminate asbestos-related disease in Australia. So it would be no surprise to all of you that annually there are over 4,000 deaths in Australia related to asbestos exposure. And these deaths are primarily driven by the 13 million tonnes of asbestos containing materials that were dispersed into the Australian built environment. Just waiting for the slide to tick over. Okay. So the Asbestos Safety and Eradication Agency has a number of legislative functions to address Australia's asbestos legacy, including our research research function where we commission, monitor and promote research about asbestos safety. Research is split across the 4 national priorities as listed in the Asbestos National Strategic Plan, being awareness, identification and management, prioritised removal and safe disposal, as well as international activities. And today I'll be focusing on the identification and management and prioritised removal and safe disposal aspect of things. There's just a bit of a lag with the slides. Okay, so this slide provides a sample of some of the research that we have currently underway. And so in terms of priority 2 around identification and management, the focus here is on legacy asbestos in situ, particularly in the residential environment and how we manage this legacy. So the research work we're undertaking includes the National Residential Asbestos Heat Map, looking at asbestos disclosure at the point of sale or lease, and as well as investigating technology for real-time and accurate asbestos identification and testing. Priority 3 around prioritised removal and safe disposal is research here. We're using data to map and interrogate the amount of asbestos left in situ and examine what options there are around removal and waste. So this includes things like the asbestos stocks and flows model, work on the quality, accessibility and consistency of asbestos registers and assessments, as well as investigating reduction strategies around illegal dumping. So I will now provide some more detail on the research items marked here in bold. Okay, so starting off with a key piece of research to set the scene on sort of the scope of the issue that we're dealing with. And I alluded to this earlier. So we have developed a model, the asbestos stocks and flows model, that provides best estimates on how much of Australia's hazardous asbestos legacy is remaining and the rate at which it is being removed. So modelling of asbestos stocks and flows in Australia has shown that in 1980, the amount of stocks peaked at approximately 11 million tonnes, and altogether 13 million tonnes of asbestos containing materials were dispersed in the built environment. In 2021, we estimated that approximately 6.4 million tonnes of ACM stocks are remaining in the built environment, and ACM flows to waste are forecast to peak at approximately 167,000 tonnes by 2030. So this model's estimated flows to waste do not include asbestos contaminated soils and rubbles, and so estimates from this model differ to other waste reporting totals that you may be aware of. So this is shown here in an alternate way where you can see the model's outputs across the entire time frame commencing from 1920 to the year 2100. You can see that asbestos containing materials entering the built environment were increasing up until the 1980s and then started to decline thereafter. So passive decline of asbestos containing materials is occurring at a rate of about 10% per decade. And so without significant intervention, we estimate that there will be approximately 1 million tonnes of asbestos containing materials remaining in the built environment in 2060, but you can see that there is a long tail continuing beyond that. So this research allows us not only to estimate the movement of asbestos containing materials in our built environment, but also to plan for current and future waste management needs. And by linking this research with other work that we are undertaking, like the National Residential Asbestos Heat Map, which I'll get onto shortly, you can see how we are generating new knowledge that contributes to a more efficient asbestos management system overall. So moving on to the National Residential Asbestos Heat Map. Here we are using artificial intelligence, or AI, for the first time to find solutions to manage Australia's residential asbestos legacy. So the extent of the Australian residential asbestos legacy is known in broad terms, but AI can fill the asbestos data and information gap, and this is more efficient, more time and cost efficient than traditional asbestos assessment and testing home by home, considering the more than 9 million residential dwellings in Australia and the proportion of those that could be considered to have an asbestos risk. So in simplest terms, having been built or renovated before 1990. So as we all know, asbestos data and information is disparate and dispersed. It is not centralised, and so knowledge about asbestos is not easily accessible to those who may need it. So AI will allow us to meaningfully compile all available asbestos data and information in the one spot and build on this limited data and information to fill in the gaps where it is missing, so we can expand our knowledge more broadly. AI can do this more quickly and cheaply compared with traditional asbestos assessment and testing, but it is not a replacement, and I'll get onto that in a bit more soon. So to achieve this objective, we have developed a research plan, and we're using a systematic approach and starting with what is feasible. So we have used detection-based AI for asbestos cement roofing in the residential environment, and have undertaken a small proof of concept study looking at this in the Australian context. And that's the next part that I'll go into more detail. We're also looking at scoping out the use of these technologies potentially to detect asbestos in remote Indigenous communities. And ultimately what we are interested in is asbestos in the whole of the home, and developing the National Residential Asbestos Heat Map. So we're using all the information that is available to us to come to this first iteration of the National Residential Asbestos Heat Map. So this is expected to be delivered in the next few weeks, but it's not an endpoint. So this is just a starting point in terms of where we are going with this piece of work. Our intention is to update this heat map with each phase of the National Strategic Plan. So yeah, the heat map itself also informs all the other inputs going into its development in a continuous loop, and it allows us to better target our resources and to manage our legacy more efficiently. So, for example, knowing where to target community awareness and behavioural change campaigns, or identifying optimal locations where asbestos waste facilities may be required, or planning for disaster recovery and response issues, or even prioritising ultimately where we want to go, prioritising areas for removal programs or incentive schemes based on the highest risk. So now to get onto the first aspect of this research phase, so the residential asbestos cement roofing hotspot study. This video summarizes the methodology used for this work. So I'll just get that going now. Oh.
A residential asbestos roof hotspot mapping project delivered by UACS and ASEA uses big data and artificial intelligence to detect asbestos roofing. The model detects asbestos roofing hotspots across Australia. And identifies asbestos at a property level. Residential detached dwellings and outbuildings with asbestos roofing are detected. Developing an evidence-based national picture that assesses the likelihood of asbestos-containing materials being present in the residential environment.
Okay, so that was a little snapshot of the approach that we use. So a little bit more detail now. So we used urban analytics to identify localities predicted to have asbestos used anywhere in residential buildings and for it to be still remaining. Predictor variables were from the ABS and ORAN platforms, for example, and they're shown here. So these publicly available data sets consisted of more than 2,000 attributes, looking at various factors such as socioeconomic, urban development, and urban growth indicators. And these factors combined were used in a multi-criteria analysis to pinpoint locations where we expected to identify asbestos-containing materials. So the top ranked localities from the urban analytics assessment were pre-screened by an asbestos assessor, and these were to enrich for corrugated asbestos cement roofing, or Super 6 in particular, as this type of material predisposes itself very easily to detection by high resolution imagery. So we landed on 113 hotspots by SA2, or statistical area level 2, which is an ABS geographical standard. So these hotspot areas were combined into 56 areas of interest by geographical proximity, and they were distributed in the states you can see here. So you will note that there is nothing listed for the Northern Territory, ACT and Tasmania, and that's because the top ranked localities in these jurisdictions did not show significant amounts of asbestos cement roofing, and so they were excluded from further analysis. And that's not to say that asbestos cement roofing does not exist in these jurisdictions, but it wasn't easily identifiable in this study. So these areas of interest covered 44 local government areas across the country with a population of about 1.7 million people and living in about 800,000 dwellings. So the AI model that was developed and subsequently trained to detect corrugated asbestos cement roof found over 13,300 asbestos cement roofs across the 56 areas of interest, and this covered a total area of 771 square kilometres across Australia. So on average, asbestos cement roofs were observed in approximately 2 out of 100 dwellings, and asbestos cement was found in different extents across the jurisdictions, ranging from 0.2% to 6.6%. And the highest concentrations were mainly in CBD fringing areas or areas within 50 kilometres from the coast. The total amount of asbestos cement roofing was estimated at just over 23,000 tonnes, or 1.48 million square metres. So if you wanted to visualise this, this is roughly the size of 200 football fields. You can see that the results for the different jurisdictions show some differences also. So for example, the highest building footprint was identified in Queensland, and that's because the asbestos cement roofs that we were detecting there were part of the main home, whereas the smallest building footprint was identified in New South Wales, and the reason behind that was that the asbestos cement roofs we were detecting in that jurisdiction were primarily smaller outbuildings in the back yards of people's homes. In terms of the model accuracy overall, you can see that it had a very high accuracy, and this was assessed by analysis of a subset of the inferences, again by an asbestos assessor, confirming that what the model was detecting and calling an asbestos cement roof was indeed that. So from the same study, we got some preliminary observations on external asbestos cement cladding, and these were documented so that we can begin to understand the extent of this aspect in the residential asbestos legacy also. This was a much smaller subset of the study localities, as you can see here. So we only covered a total of about 15 square kilometres and just over 1,500 dwellings. So qualitatively, what we saw is that external asbestos cement cladding was mostly found in CBD fringing areas or coastal areas, and it was generally in homes with a double pitched non-asbestos cement roof. So in Queensland and Western Australia, external asbestos cement cladding was commonly associated with iron roofing, and we typically saw vertical cladding cover strips in these homes. In New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia, external asbestos cement cladding was most commonly associated with a tile roof and horizontal cladding cover strips in these homes. So quantitatively and specific to this very small study, what we observed is that wherever there were homes with asbestos cement roofs, we also identified homes with asbestos cement cladding at least twofold higher prevalence. The presence of asbestos cement roofing tended to be independent of the presence of asbestos cement cladding, but there were instances where both materials were used combined in a home. So for every 3 homes identified with an asbestos cement roof, there was an additional home with an asbestos cement roof and external cladding, as well as 6 additional homes with external cladding only. Okay, so the results from this successful piece of research have been incorporated into a Stakeholder Resource Kit, and this is to assist with the implementation of the Asbestos National Strategic Plan. So we developed jurisdictional focused fact sheets, which provided the overarching national results from this research, as well as regional specific information at the state and local government level. And we also delivered a report on the residential asbestos cement roofing legacy, just to give all our jurisdictional stakeholders a brief history of asbestos cement roofing in Australia, including early importation, manufacture, and how this evolved over time. Information on potential product types, how they were consumed and used, and what the risk profiling might be, and also strategies for managing legacy asbestos cement roofing, which could be applied in a systematic way. So continuing on with the next step in our research plan, what we're really trying to understand here is, can we use the technology that we've developed for the roof hotspot study to advance the identification of asbestos in remote Indigenous communities? So we're currently consulting with the National Indigenous Australians Agency to scope the use of this technology, and specifically potentially using Google Street View to detect external asbestos cement cladding in any type of structure in these communities, as well as aerial and satellite imagery to detect asbestos cement roofs, and also potentially illegal dumping. So you can see here on the right-hand side some photographs of how we potentially can use Google Street View, where these images are available, to detect external asbestos cement cladding. So ultimately, what we want to achieve is to develop a national residential asbestos heat map, which will show the likelihood of ACMs being present or absent in the whole of the home, and to do this by predictive modelling. So this work commenced in November last year, and is based on several input data sets that have been shared with the agency, and these data sets have come from both government and non-government sources, as well as the internally generated data from our own roof hotspot study, for example. And we're expecting these outcomes in the next few weeks. And again, I just wanted to reiterate that we don't see AI as a replacement for asbestos assessment and testing. So AI does not identify asbestos in line with regulatory requirements, and predictive model does not actually tell us the location of asbestos in a home. What we believe is that both traditional and novel approaches are required in asbestos management to help us achieve getting a better understanding of property level asbestos information. And something to consider for the future, this sort of technology can also be used in non-residential sectors like the commercial sector to assist with targeting compliance activities of work health safety regulators, for example. So in terms of this predictive predictive AI-based approach. In the next few slides, I'll take you through how we are doing this, and this just gives you an overview of the entire process. So the first step is to take the data that we have collected and split it into a testing and a training data set. So the data that we have collected includes commercial asbestos assessment data, and this was only a small data set that we obtained, which has lab testing or expert opinion results on about 300 residential properties in New South Wales only. We've also collected government data, and so this is the ACM status on more than 130,000 government-owned or managed residential properties across 6 jurisdictions in Australia. And of course, the research data like the roof hotspot study that I've shown, but also other research that is currently being undertaken by other agencies like the Latrobe Valley Asbestos Task Force study, and also data from an app that is available for use by homeowners, the Acm Check App, which essentially is a questionnaire-based risk assessment that gives a determination to homeowners on whether or not their property might contain asbestos and instructions on what to do next. So with this data, you can see here in this map, what we've got is less than 50% coverage across the entire country in terms of data points at the SA1 level, so the statistical area level 1. So there's room for improvement here in terms of the amount of data that we have been able to collect. So the asbestos training data set is then combined with predictive variables covering various structural, economic and demographic attributes from Geosciences Australia Nexus portal, as well as from the ABS. Combined, these are used to train the predictive model using a machine learning algorithm. So for this study, we tested 3 different algorithms and used a combination of the various data sets that were available to us to determine what the best model would be based on the accuracy of its predictions. And the accuracy of the predictions were evaluated using the testing data subset that we kept aside from the initial data that we had. So finally, the outputs from the predictive model are being mapped in an interactive geospatial format to show us the likelihood of different SA1s, so different geographical regions across Australia, having homes within those regions with or without asbestos. So once this work is completed, what we're hoping to do is to take it around across Australia in sort of a roadshow type format to work with the jurisdictions in terms of training them how to best use the heat map to maximise what they can get out from it. And we also see this as an opportunity to learn, to see if what we've done hits the mark in terms of what people need in managing their asbestos legacy, and also to get ideas of how we might improve it for future iterations of this work. So yeah, very excited to be at this stage with this piece of work, and this will be a significant outcome for the agency. It's something that's been in the pipeline for a number of years now. So I'll move on now to technology for real-time and accurate asbestos identification and testing. So in 2021, we made a successful submission to the Business Research and Innovation Initiative, or Bree, Regulatory Technology or RegTech round. So this is a scheme that is administered by the Australian Government through the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources. And essentially what we did is invite small and medium enterprises to identify innovative solutions for our challenge, covering, for example, things like digital technologies or new equipment or technology that would address our issue. So what we wanted to achieve was making the identification of asbestos more accurate in real time and less burdensome overall. So briefly, how does Bree work? So government agencies propose challenges that they have to address issues that they're working on. Small and medium enterprises are invited to apply and to propose a new solution to those challenges. The best 4 or 5 of those are funded for a feasibility study, and they each receive about $100,000 and 3 months' time to undertake this work. The most successful from the feasibility study phase move on to a proof of concepts stage, and where they can receive up to $1 million in funding and have about 15 months to undertake this work. At the end of that phase, agencies and industry can consider buying the solution, or the SMEs can go on to sell their solution worldwide because they own the IP in developing this, their solutions. So we had 5 feasibility studies funded for our challenge, and they received grants totaling nearly $500,000 in total. So they received the maximum, essentially the maximum amount payable to each. So the 5 projects were from Active Environmental Solutions and using the alert technology, so real-time monitoring and warning device for airborne asbestos. We also had Portable Analytical Solutions and their microphaser technology, and they were looking at in situ testing of the 6 asbestos types in both bulk and airborne filter samples. Flawless Photonics also had their hand portable in situ real-time non-contact asbestos sensor. The Predictive Analytics Group had a device using microwave technology for detecting asbestos in situ in wall paneling. And UX Consulting were looking at a smartphone app to identify asbestos and connect people. So the feasibility studies have just recently completed for all 5 groups, and they were all very successful in their studies, and they have all been invited to apply for the proof of concepts application stage. So the successful applicants from the proof of concept phase are expected to commence their work in about October this year, as I said, for a period of 15 months. So hopefully in the next short while, we'll be able to let everyone know which of these applicants have moved on to the next phase. So finally, the last part of the presentation is just some work that we've recently commenced on asbestos assessments and registers. So Australian work health safety laws do not mandate how asbestos assessments describe or grade identified asbestos. And this has implications for how the identified asbestos is managed by PCBUs or persons conducting a business or undertaking. So we're exploring various avenues with this work and looking to collaborate with both Safe Work Australia and the Victorian Asbestos Eradication Agency. So with Safe Work Australia, we hope to work together to develop a pack of supporting material, including guidance on asbestos risk assessments and case studies on effective asbestos management, as they work to respond to the asbestos recommendations that arose from the recent Boland review. And in terms of our work with the VAEA, we're consulting with them to better understand the model that they have developed in terms of risk assessing asbestos in government buildings, and whether the same approach can be adopted by other PCBUs. Also, as part of our ongoing work on asbestos disclosure requirements in residential properties, including for buyers and renters, we're developing a number of new resources to assist homeowners to better understand the importance of identifying asbestos in their properties and the role of asbestos professionals. So this includes an awareness campaign, which we're expecting to launch next month, so in June of this year. We'll have a new landing page on our website and new resources that have been specifically developed for this campaign. So this includes fact sheets about obligations and rights in relation to disclosure of asbestos for buyers, sellers, renters and landlords. a guide to what a residential asbestos assessment is and what to expect if you do decide to undertake one. Educational videos, one for buyers and sellers and one for renters and landlords, just to hopefully get the message across in as simple a format as possible, as well as an asbestos disclosure tool. And this was developed following some research with behavioural insights being taken into consideration. So altogether, we'll be pulling stakeholder packs and sending those out to whoever is interested once the campaign is launched. And this will include advertising material that can be used to advertise the campaign, as well as to link to the resources available on our website. So we're aware that occupational hygienists and larger asbestos consulting firms don't generally work in the residential space for commercial reasons, as we understand it primarily. But as we are encouraging homeowners to use asbestos professionals, we hope that you can assist us in this cause by also promoting this type of approach. And something that you can directly help us with, and that we're commencing in the next little while, we want to work with industry to develop a national standard on conducting asbestos assessments. And this will be something similar, we hope, to the UK's HSG 264 asbestos survey guide. And by doing this, we aim to get a consistent approach to assessing and documenting asbestos risk. And this will be important for our next phase of the Asbestos National Strategic Plan, as there we're intending to focus on prioritising asbestos removal in all sectors. So we're aiming to set up a technical working group for this project shortly, and something for you to consider. We ideally like AIOH to nominate representatives for this technical working group. Okay, so I hope from what you've seen today, you can appreciate or understand more ASEA's role in coordinating priorities and strategic actions across Australia, and doing this including through our research, and that the new knowledge and resources that we are creating contribute to our shared purpose with all our stakeholders as we work towards our aim of preventing asbestos exposure to eliminate asbestos-related diseases in Australia. And as I mentioned, we're always keen to engage with experts in the field. So please reach out to us. You can contribute to different pieces of research, not only the one that I've mentioned here today. You know, your expertise is what we need to drive better actions in this space. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgia. Great presentation, very interesting. I've been fortunate enough to be privy to a lot of this work as I represent the AIOH on the represent on ASEA. So I've been really lucky in that respect. Okay, I'd like to open the floor to any questions for our members and other people on this webinar that would like to ask Dr. Georgia. So I'm guessing the way we go about doing this is raising your hand, and I can, or Michelle will give you voice access. Okay, we have Alan.
Yeah, hi Andrew. Can you hear me okay?
Certainly can.
Great. I've got a few questions, but probably the one that interests me most would be, there's firstly, the identification of ACM roof hotspots using satellite imagery. It seems like a really good initiative. The video showed identification of Super 6 profile ACM roofing, and I've got a couple of questions in relation to that. One is, does the AI also attempt to differentiate between asbestos and non-asbestos Super 6 roofing, like the cellulose cement Super 6 profile sheeting? And the second part of this question is, does the AI also identify other profiles of ACM roofing? So there was Fibrolite made by James Hardy, had a standard 3-inch corrugation profile, but that as far as I know, was more commonly used on residential roofs, and the Super 6 was more common on industrial roofs.
So the AI model can be trained to detect any asbestos cement roof profile. So yes, if there was sufficient fibrillite, I think you called it, with the smaller corrugations that we had would be able to see with aerial imagery, you could train the model to pick that up. So interesting that you say that so is it fibrillite with the 3-inch corrugations that you said is more common?
Super 6 for the fibrillite product, and I've got a link to I was just googling the James Hardy specifications for the product. I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah. So look, if it's out there and there's imagery for it, the model can be trained to detect it. In terms of differentiating between, I assume you're saying asbestos containing and non-asbestos containing cement roofs. What we've used for this model in particular is aerial imagery. So this is based on detecting patterns. You might need to use something like hyperspectral imagery where you've got different wavelengths reflecting off the roof and hopefully being able to differentiate asbestos containing and non-asbestos containing sufficiently for you to make a determination on that. We piloted the use of hyperspectral imagery at the start of the asbestos cement roof hotspots project. There were 2 issues there. So the resolution was lower. So it only has a resolution of about 30 centimetres. So the satellite imagery compared with the aerial imagery, which has a resolution of about 5 to 10 centimetres. So the 5 to 10 centimetre resolution gave us a better ability to pick up smaller footprint asbestos cement roofs, so particularly when we were looking at outbuildings and that sort of thing. Also, in terms of hyperspectral versus aerial, the hyperspectral analysis required a lot of post-processing to make sure that what we had in fact detected was asbestos cement roofing. So it doesn't give a clean spectral image. I'm not using the right words. That makes it as easy to pick up compared with the aerial imagery and pixel-based detection.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure how commonly the cellulose cement Super 6 profile's been used in residential. I've only seen that product used basically as a replacement for asbestos Super 6 on industrial buildings.
Okay.
For example, like patching a section of damaged cladding, or even replacing an entire roof or wall cladding, so that it's got the building has the same look to it, and it does look. The only visual difference I can really tell from those 2 products is that the non-asbestos ones look newer because they are, but I'm not sure how reliably you could differentiate between those 2 from imagery.
Yeah, look, if it's simply a fact of looking newer, that would, it requires probably some manual input initially to train it up and try and differentiate. I guess to point out with asbestos cement roofs from our stocks and flows model, what we think overall in terms of asbestos containing materials that went into the built environment as roofs is that it was a small proportion. So 2% of the 13 million tonnes of ACN we estimate went in as roofing, and 2/3 of that we think went into the residential space, and about 1/3 into like commercial and industrial. So there's not a lot in terms of quantities. It is a lot, don't take that the wrong way. In terms of the entire legacy that we're dealing with and our ability to detect it, roofing is a smaller proportion overall. So when we start breaking it down to different subtypes and less common materials, it makes building of the AI model more difficult, but certainly not impossible.
Okay, thanks, Georgia.
All right, I also have a question that's funneled through, and I hope I interpreted the question correctly. Georgia, one of our members has asked, With respects to the new risk assessment process that you talked at the end about making, I think, consistent asbestos assessments similarly to what they do in the UK, what training requirements have you requested for those asbestos assessors putting together that or working on that project?
Look, we haven't done a final determination in terms of what the technical working group would involve, but certainly qualifications in asbestos assessment, so the different types of licenses that are available there, and then occupational hygienists with asbestos expertise. So we are looking for people qualified in this space and who have this as a focus in terms of what they do in their day-to-day work. We really need people that are in the space working this day by day to really understand what it is that's going on out there and where the gaps and problems that we commonly hear about are, so that we can try and iron those things out. So still very early in terms of where we're at, and I can try and provide further details in terms of the terms of reference for that working group if that's been developed, but certainly will be qualifications and experience in this space.
No worries. Hopefully I asked the right question and got the right response there. I'm looking through the those present. I don't have any other further hands up. Is there any last calls for any other questions for Dr. Georgia Katib before we end this webinar? No? Okay, I think it's a reflection of how good your presentation was, Georgia.
Too kind.
Okay then, well, on behalf of the OH, thank you very much for everyone coming on board. Thank you, Dr. Georgia Katib, for taking the time to talk to us about these excellent projects, and hopefully we can get you back at a later date to hear a bit more about some of those other projects as they progress. Thank you very much.
Great.
Have a lovely afternoon. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.